The Standard Universal was very popular when it came out, but it was designed as an intercity aircraft. It was designed in the New York area to go between one town and another town, and generally to have prepared landing surfaces. When James A. Richardson's Western Canada Airways showed interest in the plane, that was the first plane they were operating in northwestern Ontario. They really liked it. It was a robust aircraft, it was reliable, and it was one of the first aircraft being used in the bush in winter conditions. And so it stood the test when they put it to work. But it had a few problems. And at one point, the company had 3 Standard Universals, and at one point all 3 of them needed service. They were all upside down or damaged somewhere in the bush. So Fokker sent his test pilot with a team of engineers to Canada to fix the aircraft and get them back in service. And the test pilot was a guy named Bernd Balchen, who later became, I believe, a brigadier general in the United States Air Force. And Bernd Balchen got the planes back in service. He was Norwegian, and he really enjoyed being in Canada in the northern country in the winter. And so he stayed on for about 3 months with Western Canada Airways, and together they did an experimental flight where they were transporting a survey team to the port of Churchill. The survey team was trying to decide where to place the port. And so by doing this, they set a record for the amount of tonnage carried in a 2-week period by aircraft. This was a world record at the time. And it basically set up Western Canada Airways as the new leader in transportation in Canada. So when Bernd Balchen went back to Fokker, he came back with a whole lot of ideas about how to improve the plane for bush operations and for winter operations. And those ideas became the Super Universal. They transformed basically in small ways, but these were revolutionary ideas at the time. Things like moving the crankshaft. You can see the crankshaft on this plane is up toward the window of the cockpit. On the Standard, it was closer to the ground. The idea being that if I'm taking off from New York City, I've got ground crew to crank up my engine and off I go. Well, the guys in the bush in Canada, a guy like Frederick Stevenson, would stand on the ground next to the plane, crank it up. Once the engine got going, he'd scramble up the side. Now that was an open cockpit plane, so he could slip into the seat. So this one, they decided, well, if it's going to operate in the winter, it's got to have an enclosed cockpit. But the roof is a door that can be opened, and so the pilot can stand up and lean over the windscreen and crank up the engine, and he doesn't need anybody on the ground to help him out. And so that adaptation allowed companies like Western Canada Airways to break into new territory and operate in places that there would be nobody on the ground to get their plane going. And some of the other things here that, like this, it's the landing gear system here. These bungee cables, allowed the plane, obviously the wheels could move independently as they're landing, but the key here is that in the winter, if you're landing at -40, if you're landing at -40, this thing's going to break basically every time the plane lands. It's going to snap from the cold and from the pressure it's under. So that's why it's just hanging out here. They could pull the pins, they could tie on a new bungee cable, and off they went again. This idea that the plane could be modified, that the plane could be maintenance done on it in the field by the pilot without having to bring a whole bunch of tools around. This is the concept that the whole air industry was built on in Canada in the 1920s. And this plane became the most popular aircraft in the country. The Super Universal was the first plane to fly over the North Magnetic Pole. It was the first plane to fly over the barren lands that are now modern day mainland Nunavut. It was the first plane to fly the full length of the Mackenzie River. So it had so many firsts in Canada, and it really is one of the cornerstones of what made aviation possible in our country in a commercial sense.
Thanks, Davide.
You got it.